My name is Janet Blake. I'm 39 years old. And this is the story of how I built an empire with the man I loved, only to realize he was trying to bury me under it. But I didn't break. I rebuilt the stage he thought he owned, and invited him to watch it collapse from the front row. 8 years ago, Mason and I were just two dreamers in a hot garage in Austin, Texas. 2 laptops, a second-hand couch, and nothing but grit. We poured everything into that startup, late nights fueled by instant noodles and espresso, weekends blurred by pitch decks and whiteboards. I handled the strategy and design. He handled investors and the big talk. We were yin and yang. And I was proud of the man who used to say, "This is Janet, the real reason this company exists." That man no longer exists. I didn't see the change at first. It was gradual. Like paint fading on a once vibrant wall. It started after our Series C round, millions in new funding, 3 offices, a headcount of 200, and suddenly Mason began looking at me like I didn't belong. At meetings, he stopped waiting for my input. When board members asked questions, he answered without turning to me. When I suggested new marketing strategies, ideas I had stress-tested for weeks, he waved them off. "Let's keep it simple," he'd say. "Don't overthink it. Simple." As if I hadn't spent my entire adult life building the very foundation he was standing on. The worst came when I walked into the boardroom one Monday morning and saw my chair, moved to the far end of the table. Mason sat at the head, flanked by our newly hired creative director and CFO. I was closer to the door than to the discussion. Then came the moment that broke something deep inside me. Mason turned to me during the presentation and said, flatly, "Janet, can you print the appendix before the extended strategy session? I need it ready by lunch." I didn't answer. Just nodded. That appendix? I'd written it. Every data point. Every revenue projection. I had stayed up until 3 a.m. for 6 nights tweaking it. But it had his name on the cover. I wanted to scream. To slam the report on the table and yell, "I made this." But I didn't. Because wolves don't howl when they're cornered. They wait. From that day on, I became silent. But I wasn't passive. I moved into the old file room down the hall, now labeled Flex Workspace. It was small. Windowless. But it became my war room. Every night, I stayed late. And watched. Studied. I tracked his words, his habits, and his lies. Mason was so busy soaking in the spotlight that he forgot who installed the lighting. The turning point came one night in late August. I found Mason's iPad on the kitchen counter. Unlocked. He had just returned from yet another urgent New York client trip. I wasn't looking for anything. I swear I wasn't. But when the screen lit up, it was already on the message that changed everything. Same room as before. Bring the red dress. I've ordered the champagne. 2 whole days. Just us. No name. No shame. Just a message from an unfamiliar number. My stomach twisted. I checked our shared calendar. A hotel reservation for 2 nights at the Lorette Signature Suite, starting September 17th. My birthday. I clicked into our synced business email, confirmation sent to him and his guest. He hadn't even bothered to erase it. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the cheating. It was that he didn't even lie well. No hidden folder. No secret app. No clever nickname. As if I didn't matter enough to cover his tracks. I opened our old backup messaging system from the early travel days. There I found everything. Threads filled with sweet lies. "I want all of you. No laptops this time. The lake view, the one with your little drawing in the window." My heart shattered. And I knew who it was, Lana Monroe. Our newest hire. Creative director. Ambitious, sharp-tongued, always dressed like she walked off a Vogue shoot. And always 2 steps too close to Mason in the hallway. I opened her Instagram. Public. Arrogant. A goldmine of evidence. There he was, his hand low on her back at an event in Milan. Another picture of her in a blazing red dress. The same red Mason once said he'd never forget, because I wore it the night he proposed. Now he gave that memory to someone else. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt something colder. Stillness. Precision. A storm that didn't rise, it waited. I began building my plan. And it started with a simple folder, 17th. Inside, I placed every screenshot, email, booking confirmation, photo, and message. I wasn't just documenting betrayal. I was laying the groundwork for demolition. And that's when I started digging deeper. Over the past year, I'd noticed a few unusual payments, odd consulting fees from unfamiliar vendors. Mason always brushed them off. Lana's team, he said. Nothing major. But I no longer trusted a single word from his mouth. I traced every invoice. Same formatting. Same punctuation style. Different company names. But when I checked the IP addresses on our internal submission system, they all came from the same source. And they were all authorized by Mason and Lana. I hired a digital forensics expert, Jordan Wells, someone I had worked with during a data breach years ago. Discreet. Brilliant. Ruthless. Jordan worked fast. Within 5 days, he confirmed what I feared and hoped. The companies were shells. Fake entities registered to a mailbox service in Nevada. Payments totaling over $480,000 had been funneled into a trust named LM Holdings. Lana Monroe. The initials weren't even subtle. It was embezzlement. Corporate fraud. Executed right under the board's nose. I wasn't just dealing with an affair. I was about to take down a CEO. I just needed a spark to light the fire. That spark came in the form of Raymond Adler, one of our earliest investors. Sharp, principled, and completely immune to Mason's charm. Mason had always hated Raymond because he asked the hard questions. I, on the other hand, respected him. So I called him from a private number. Told him I needed 30 minutes. Not as a founder. Not as a professional. As a woman betrayed. He listened. He agreed to meet. And that was the moment Mason's empire began to shake. Raymond Adler didn't waste time. He flew in from Minneapolis the next morning and met me at a quiet coffee shop tucked inside a converted warehouse in Austin's East End, an industrial pocket where no one from our company would dare wander for lunch. The smell of old wood and espresso filled the air. I arrived early, but he was already there, seated in a corner booth with 2 black coffees and a folder in front of him. Always prepared. Always watching. I slid into the booth across from him and didn't waste time either. I laid it all out, printouts of the fake vendor invoices, screenshots of bank transfers, the names of the shell companies, and the timeline of how the money moved. When I reached the messages between Mason and Lana, I paused. This part isn't about business, I said. But it explains motive. Raymond didn't flinch. Didn't say a word. Just turned page after page, jaw clenched tight, eyes scanning like a machine. He reached the end of the folder and leaned back. They really thought they were untouchable, he muttered. They didn't think I was watching, I replied. That's when I asked him, straight and without fear, will you help me? Raymond didn't hesitate. I've been waiting for an excuse to cut him off for years. We devised the next move in silence, sipping bitter coffee that neither of us cared to sweeten. Raymond would bring in an independent auditing firm under the guise of a routine pre-IPO review. Mason wouldn't question it, it was standard procedure, especially with our funding milestones. Meanwhile, I began drafting amendments to our corporate charter. I buried the dagger in the one place Mason never looked, policy paperwork. Clause 4.2b. Newly inserted into page 14 of our 18-page ethics and governance document. It stated that any executive found engaging in financial misconduct verified by independent auditors could be immediately suspended by the board chair without requiring a full vote. Just one signature. One line. And Mason had no idea. I printed the full packet and slipped it into his weekly compliance stack. On Monday morning, I placed it neatly on his desk with a sticky note, "Legal team needs your signature by 10 a.m. for board filing." He signed it at 9:26 a.m. Didn't even skim past the cover page. "You've always been good at the boring stuff," he chuckled as he flipped lazily through the papers. I smiled. He had just signed away his crown. 2 days before my birthday, September 15th, I booked the Skyline Suite at the Rosedale Private Suites in Austin's West End. It was the same hotel Mason once took me to on our second anniversary. He surprised me back then with champagne and a handwritten letter promising we'd return every year. We never did. He forgot. But I didn't. Mason had booked the same floor for his tryst with Lana, room 903. I chose room 901, right next door. I walked into the suite and began setting the scene like a silent play. I arranged the chairs at a soft angle, left the door cracked just enough to cast light onto the hallway. I placed evidence neatly on the glass coffee table, screenshots, invoices, wire trails, the trust fund details, all labeled and organized. 2 untouched champagne flutes stood beside a bottle of Moët I hadn't even opened. The lights were low and golden, casting long shadows. And playing through the suite's sound system was the original piano track from our first promo video. The one Mason once called the sound of everything we built. He'd hear it again. But this time, it would signal the end. I wore a sleek black dress. Nothing provocative. It wasn't for seduction. It was for clarity. My hair pinned up, my lips neutral. I looked like the ghost of a woman who had been erased and had come back with receipts. At 7:08 p.m. on September 17th, my birthday, the hotel front desk sent a simple message, "Room 903 has checked in. The woman is on her way up from the bar." I replied, "Thank you." 3 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. Not Lana. Not Mason. Raymond. He walked in with a black leather briefcase and a silence that made the room heavier. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since the day he moved my chair." Raymond placed the case on the table and opened it. Inside, the official findings from the auditors, notarized statements from 3 firms, the signed charter Mason had carelessly approved, and a summons for an emergency board meeting scheduled for Monday morning. "We've secured the votes," Raymond said. 4 out of 6 board members are aligned. He doesn't know yet. He will, I said. Tonight. At 7:22 p.m., a hallway filled with the sound of footsteps. Heels first. Then dress shoes. Lana's laughter. Then Mason's voice. "Wait until you see the balcony." And then silence. Just before their door shut, Mason caught sight of the warm light spilling from room 901. Our room. My room. He stopped mid-step, staring at the light like it was a ghost from the past. I watched through the sliver in the door. He was frozen. Lana's hand was on his arm. Her expression shifted from flirtation to confusion. I opened the door slowly. Raymond remained seated, flipping through documents like he was reviewing final contract clauses. I stepped into the doorway, holding a glass of untouched champagne. Mason's voice cracked. "Janet. What is this?" I smiled. "Happy birthday to me." Lana's expression twisted. Confusion, then fear. She let go of Mason's arm and took a slow step back. Raymond didn't look up. He said only one thing. "You'll want to be at Monday's board meeting. 8 a.m. sharp." Mason's face drained of color. "Raymond. I don't understand." "You don't need to," I said, standing just inches from the man who used to be my everything. You'll read all about it inside. Or not. Either way, I will. Lana opened her mouth to speak, but I met her eyes. She closed it again. My stare wasn't violent. It was surgical. Cold and final. Raymond stood, gathered the files, and said, "This isn't a scene. It's a conclusion." Mason looked broken. "What do you want, Janet? To ruin me?" I shook my head. "No. I want you to know what it feels like to be erased. Like I was. Like I am no one. You didn't destroy me, Mason. You just gave me the time and silence I needed to take everything back." I didn't wait for a reply. I closed the door gently. Like ending a call that no longer needed to continue. Inside, the music played on. The room remained warm. Raymond sat down again, quietly sipping his glass of champagne. "You did better than I expected," he said. I looked out the window, where the skyline of Austin flickered in amber light. "I didn't do this for you," I replied. "I did it for the woman who sat in the back of the boardroom and kept the coffee warm. That woman was gone. And I wasn't stepping back into her shoes. I was building new ones. Steel-toed." The night didn't end with slammed doors or screaming matches. Mason didn't knock again. He didn't text. He didn't call. I imagine he just stood there for a while, outside room 903, realizing the woman he tried to push out had never really left. She had simply stepped aside, watching everything like a quiet architect ready to redraw the entire blueprint. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't from nerves. It was from stillness. I lay in the hotel bed in that crisp white linen, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft piano track looping from the speakers. I kept thinking about how many times I had been talked over, sidelined, underestimated, not just by Mason, but by others, too. Investors who looked at me as the nice one, the woman behind the curtain. Even some of our own staff had started calling me Mason's wife instead of co-founder. They forgot whose signature was on the original LLC papers. They forgot who locked in our first 2 clients with nothing more than a prototype and a hand-drawn pitch deck. They forgot who kept payroll running the 1 month Mason accidentally overdrew our operating account by $90,000. I didn't forget. And starting the next morning, neither would anyone else. I arrived at headquarters at exactly 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the board meeting was scheduled. I wore a charcoal gray power suit with sharp lapels and a pearl necklace my mother left me before she passed. I used to wear it to events when I wanted to feel like I belonged. Now, I wore it because I knew I did. As I walked through the corridors on the 12th floor, the usual casual chatter faded. Conversations paused. People looked up from their laptops. I could feel their eyes on me, but no one dared say anything. Something in the air told them today wasn't just another Monday. It was a storm. Raymond was already in the boardroom, talking with Allison Burke and Dean Morales, 2 of our senior board members. I noticed how they greeted me, not with awkward smiles or forced politeness, but with subtle nods. Respect. Recognition. By 7:58 a.m., everyone was seated. Everyone except Mason. The door burst open at 7:59. He stumbled in, unshaven, collar wrinkled, a man unraveling from the inside out. He didn't even look at me. He just walked straight to the CEO's seat, the chair I had picked out, the one he thought was his alone, and sank into it like someone trying to disappear. No one offered him coffee. At exactly 8 a.m., Raymond stood up and began. "Thank you all for attending this emergency meeting. We're addressing a matter of executive ethics and financial governance." I stood without hesitation, folder in hand. "In the past 8 months," I began, "this company has paid over $480,000 to 3 consulting firms, Vantage Core, PulseView, and Nexapoint. However, an independent audit has confirmed these entities do not exist in any functional capacity. They are shell corporations. All funds were funneled into a personal trust based in Bice, under the name LM Holdings. A click of the remote, and the large screen behind me lit up. Wire trails, invoice comparisons, IP data, screenshots of transactions, each one damning. Each one indisputable. All payments were authorized by the acting CEO and the chief marketing officer, I said, my voice calm but firm. And all signatures have been verified. Mason leaned forward, hands gripping the table. Janet, you're trying to frame me. Raymond raised a hand without looking at him. There will be no interruptions. Mason slumped back in his seat, his face pale, lips pressed thin. I opened the next folder and continued, per Clause 4.2b in the company's ethics charter, recently signed by Mr. Blake, if any executive is confirmed to have engaged in financial misconduct, the board chair has the authority to suspend said executive immediately, pending legal review. Raymond nodded. The findings have been verified by 3 separate firms, he said. All documentation is notarized and recorded. I looked directly at each board member. Allison? She nodded. I support immediate suspension. Dean? I agree. Mark Dunley, the last holdout, hesitated. He looked between Mason and me, his gaze flickering with 1,000 calculations. And then he nodded. It's time. Raymond closed the file. Effective immediately, Mason Blake is suspended from all executive functions. His system access and privileges will be revoked within the hour. Legal procedures will follow. Mason didn't argue. He didn't speak. He stared down at his palms like he was waiting to find something there, some last shred of control. I gathered my documents and stepped forward. Temporarily, I will assume operational leadership until the transition is complete. All affected departments will receive updates by noon today. There was no applause. No dramatic exit. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows a decision no one can undo. I walked out, hearing Mason's footsteps behind me. Slower. Hollow. I stepped into the elevator. He caught up, standing just outside the door but not entering. He looked at me, his voice barely audible. Janet, do you not recognize me anymore? I didn't flinch. I met his eyes. No. But you stopped recognizing me long before I disappeared from yours. The elevator doors closed. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Back in the CEO office, my office, I walked in without knocking. I didn't wait for anyone to hand me the title back, because in truth, they never took it. I had always been the architect. Mason was the tenant. Now the lease was up. 3 days after the board meeting, a terse email arrived in HR's inbox. Subject line, effective immediately. No greeting. No apology. No signature except for a digital stamp from Lana Monroe's company email. She had resigned without a single word to anyone, no final meeting, no polite goodbye, not even a copy-pasted thank you to the team she had misled. I didn't publicize it. No need. Those who needed to understand already did. And the rest? They weren't worth the energy. If you build something real, it speaks louder than a press release ever could. But Mason? He was still trying to find his footing in the wreckage. Exactly 1 week later, I received an email from his personal Gmail account. The subject line read, "Just one moment." The body was short and clumsy, not about the company. "I just want to see you. Please. I need to know what's still there, between us." I didn't respond. I had spent enough time giving oxygen to a man who never noticed I was suffocating. But the next day, my assistant came in looking flustered. "Janet, there's someone here to see you." She wouldn't leave. "Who is it?" I asked. She hesitated. "Jeanette Blake. Mason's mother." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so perfectly ironic. The same woman who once told me I was too ambitious to be a wife was now in my office years later, trying to negotiate with the woman she once dismissed. I nodded. Send her in. She entered with quiet grace. Still elegant. Still sharp. Her silver hair was curled meticulously, her blouse pressed to perfection. She sat down slowly, her eyes searching mine for something, remorse, perhaps, or softness. I'm not here to defend him, she said plainly. I just want to ask, how far are you planning to take this? I folded the folder I had been working on and leaned back. I'm not taking it anywhere, Jeanette. He walked there all by himself. She inhaled through her nose, trying to steady her voice. He's not eating. He's not sleeping. He said, he never thought you could be this cold. I stared at her, calm and unmoved. You know, I used to think betrayal came from weakness. From impulse. But now I understand, it comes from entitlement. From the belief that the rules don't apply to you. That you can take and never be held accountable. He didn't think I'd do anything, not because he thought I was too kind. But because he thought I was too small. Jeanette said nothing for a long while. She simply looked at me, nodded once, slowly, and stood. As she reached the door, she turned back. He never deserved the company. And he never deserved you. Then she left. And just like that, the Blake family ties were finally undone. In the months that followed, I began the real work. Not revenge. Restoration. The kind that rebuilds a culture from the inside out. The first step was dismantling everything Mason had installed to consolidate his power. His hiring pipeline, his cronies in marketing and legal, the yes men he promoted because they never questioned his decisions. One by one, they were replaced. Quietly. No drama. No bloodbath. Just restructuring based on performance reviews and clear metrics. I didn't want loyalists. I wanted builders. One of my favorite rehires was Naomi, a brilliant marketing analyst Mason had laid off 2 years ago because she wasn't a culture fit. She returned with more fire than ever. By the end of her second month, she had tripled engagement metrics across 3 key campaigns and led a transparency initiative that brought in more client referrals than we'd seen in a year. It was like breathing new air into the lungs of a company that had been slowly suffocating. Revenue climbed 13% in the first quarter post-transition. Projects Mason had shelved as too experimental turned out to be profitable under the right leadership. Our customer service unit, once gutted to save costs, was brought back with a weekly feedback loop and an in-house support center. Complaints dropped by 40%. Repeat clients rose by 22%. But I didn't blast it across headlines. I didn't do interviews. I let the numbers speak. And inside the building, people felt the shift. Meetings became collaborative. Junior designers spoke up without fear. Product leads challenged the status quo without worrying about retaliation. For the first time in years, the company felt alive. And maybe that was my biggest win. I didn't just get my title back. I got my soul back. In the CEO's office, the one Mason used to treat like his private throne, I made 2 changes. First, I replaced the painting behind the desk. He had hung a framed image of a Manhattan skyscraper, some building he idolized from a Forbes cover. I took it down and replaced it with a framed map, marked with 5 pins: Austin, Denver, Nashville, Toronto, and Chicago. The 5 cities where I personally signed our expansion deals. The second change was small but deliberate. I updated the nameplate on the door. It now read, Janet Blake, co-founder and chief executive officer. No spotlight. No bold font. But no room for confusion, either. Some people expected me to do a press tour. Maybe give a few interviews about women in leadership, or share some polished LinkedIn post about reclaiming power. But I didn't. I didn't need to sell the story. Because people were already talking. Investors who had once treated me as a founder's wife now reached out directly, offering warm congratulations, not out of politeness, but out of recognition. Clients began requesting to meet with me instead of Mason's old stand-ins. Even former competitors sent quiet nods through mutual contacts. She pulled it off. She's the real deal. And then came Mason's legal team. A formal letter. Polite, sterile, desperate. They requested a review of the board's suspension terms. Mr. Blake seeks clarity on future equity rights and a potential pathway to reinstatement, it read. I didn't even bother forwarding it to Raymond. Our legal department replied swiftly, terms are final. No reconsideration at this time. That was it. No apology. No accountability. Just a man grasping at whatever threads of power he hadn't noticed had already unraveled. I never responded to Mason directly. I didn't need to. But late one Thursday night in December, Raymond stopped by my office. He didn't schedule a meeting or announce himself. He just knocked once and stepped in, holding a bottle of that same red wine we'd once shared after closing our Canadian expansion deal 5 years earlier. The label was dusty, aged. A quiet callback to a time before everything fractured. He placed it gently on the table, then handed me a small card. I opened it. Inside, in neat handwriting, were 10 words. Thank you for reminding me why I invested in you. That was all. No speech. No toast. Just quiet presence. We poured 2 glasses and sat together, looking out over the twinkling lights of downtown Austin. For a moment, there was no boardroom war, no betrayal, no strategy. Just stillness. The kind of peace that only arrives when you know you've done what needed to be done, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Raymond raised his glass toward mine. To survival, he said. I clinked my glass softly. To reinvention. There was no pride in my voice. Just clarity. I hadn't burned Mason's world down. I had simply moved the spotlight back where it belonged and let the shadows reveal themselves. Weeks passed. Winter set in. I heard whispers that Mason had moved in with his sister in the suburbs. He'd been spotted at a neighborhood coffee shop with a full beard and a distant look. No one knew if he was planning a comeback, but honestly, I didn't care. Let him start over. Let him feel the weight of rebuilding without erasing someone else to do it. As for Lana, she disappeared completely. No new job updates, no industry chatter, not even a single tagged photo on Instagram. She was gone from the public eye, as though she'd only ever existed in Mason's curated fantasy. I never wished either of them harm. I just hoped they finally understood the truth. You can't steal what someone built with blood, time, and silence, and expect to keep it. Inside the company, we restructured every major department with care. HR policies were updated. A formal code of ethics was reintroduced, this time written collaboratively, not handed down like scripture. Anonymous surveys were reinstated quarterly, and I made it a personal mission to review every single one that came in. In the quiet corners of our open concept office, things began to shift. People no longer whispered before giving feedback. Designers pitched bold ideas without fear. Our finance lead, once hesitant to challenge projections, now sent me detailed reports with suggestions I didn't even request. And for the first time in years, someone from the customer support team was promoted to the executive advisory board. Not because they were loud, but because they were excellent. That was the culture I wanted, talent over loyalty. Truth over ego. Collaboration over control. And slowly, without fanfare, we began to thrive again. I found myself smiling more. Sleeping better. Walking into work with my head not just high, but grounded. There's something sacred in knowing you've been through the storm and come out clean on the other side, not by accident, but by choice. I didn't tell this story for pity. I told it because somewhere out there, another woman is sitting at the far end of a conference table she designed, holding a pen that no one sees, and being told to fetch coffee in the very room she helped build. To her, I say, don't shout. Don't beg. Just build. Because the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's competence, delivered in silence. It was mid-January when the first handwritten letter arrived. Not from Mason. From his sister. I almost tossed it aside, just another white envelope in a pile of contracts, vendor reports, and equity documents. But her cursive was unmistakable. Inside were just 3 lines, written in pen. He hasn't spoken much. But he keeps rereading your name in old emails. He thought he could live without your voice. Now he can't live with the echo of it. No plea. No request. Just quiet observation. I folded the letter and tucked it away, not for nostalgia, but for documentation. Another reminder of what happens when you bet against the wrong woman. Later that week, my assistant forwarded a new message from Mason's legal team. This one wasn't about reinstatement or equity negotiations. It was personal. A letter from Mr. Blake, requesting a one-on-one conversation outside corporate boundaries. Location and tone are at your discretion. He seeks closure, not confrontation. I didn't answer. Some stories don't need epilogues. Especially not from those who chose their exits without looking back. Still, I could feel the company watching. Not in a gossipy way, but in the quiet tension of a staff waiting to see what leadership looks like when hurt meets power. So I showed them. I didn't freeze the past. I transformed it. We began a series called The Founders Talks, monthly open discussions where employees could ask me anything about how the company began, the hurdles we faced, and how we would grow next. I didn't hide Mason's role. I gave him credit where credit was due. But I didn't hide the fall either. This company was never about one person, I said during the first talk, standing in front of a packed room of curious faces. It was built by ideas, long nights, and people who stayed up without asking for applause. That's the kind of legacy we're preserving. After that, things changed even more. One of our quietest engineers approached me after a team lunch and said, I never felt safe speaking in meetings before. But now I do. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a victory march. It was better. It was culture. In February, we restructured the profit-sharing model. Everyone from executive leaders to junior interns received a quarterly bonus percentage tied to company-wide performance, not just departmental KPIs. When it was announced, some employees cried. Others clapped. A few were just too stunned to react. I didn't do it to win hearts. I did it because it was right. But even justice has its ripple effects. That same week, a Forbes contributor requested an interview with me for a feature titled From Silence to CEO, The Women Reclaiming Corporate Power. I declined. I wasn't interested in being the face of revenge. That wasn't my story. Not anymore. Instead, I sent them a statement. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And when I spoke, I didn't need a microphone. I had proof. The article ran without my photo, but it still went viral. Not because I gave them a perfect quote, but because they wrote what mattered, the numbers, the recovery, the structure rebuilt from ruin. In the background, I heard Mason tried pitching a small tech startup idea to one of our former investors. It didn't go well. He hadn't realized that reputation travels faster than ambition. Someone told me he's living quietly now. Teaching coding courses at a community center. Driving a used sedan. Going to bed before 9. I don't take pleasure in it. I just find it poetic. The man who once used to plan yacht launches now wakes up to laminated worksheets and a room full of teenagers who don't care who he used to be. And Lana? Gone. Every trace of her evaporated from the industry like morning mist. No portfolio updates. No speaking engagements. Just an empty LinkedIn page with the words, currently transitioning. She won't come back. People don't forget that kind of exposure, not when it's done right. Not when the truth is wrapped in facts and delivered with the patience of someone who never needed revenge, just resolution. But the most unexpected moment came on a Monday morning in March. I arrived early, as I always did. The office was still quiet. The sun filtered in through the high glass windows. And on my desk, a small wooden box. No name. No note. Just a velvet lining inside, and a single object, a chess piece. A black queen. Carved from marble. Heavy. Cold. Powerful. Someone knew. Someone had seen the whole game. And they wanted me to know that I hadn't just survived it, I'd checkmated the entire board. I placed it on the edge of my desk. Not as a warning. As a reminder. Because I never wanted to forget what it felt like to be the woman in the back of the room, clutching a pen while others took credit. I never wanted to forget what it felt like to write the strategy, only to be asked to fetch the coffee. Now I write the playbook. And they ask me what happens next. The morning of our company's 10-year anniversary, I stood at the far window of the 12th floor conference room, looking out over the city that had seen the best and worst of me. Austin was waking up below, traffic humming, cranes swinging, sunlight splintering across glass towers. Behind me, the room was already filling. Team leads, early investors, new hires, old allies. There was laughter, clinking coffee mugs, quiet music in the background. We were celebrating a decade of growth, not with a flashy party, but with intention. With presence. With legacy. I hadn't planned to speak. I was going to let the numbers, the culture, the people in the room speak for themselves. But as I turned to face the company I helped build, rebuilt, I felt something shift. Not pressure. Just clarity. So I stepped up. No microphone. No slides. Just me and them. When we started this company, we didn't know what it would become. We had a name, a dream, and a shared belief that what we built mattered. But what I didn't expect, what none of us expect when we chase dreams, is how often the world tries to replace the hands that do the real building. The room went silent, listening. I've sat in every seat in this company, designer, strategist, assistant, even coffee fetcher. I know what it's like to be looked at like you're invisible in a room you designed. I also know what it's like to take that silence and turn it into a strategy. People didn't move. They just watched me, waiting. I'm not here because of a title. I'm here because I remembered who I was when others tried to forget me. And I want every person in this company to know, you are not here by luck. You are here because of your talent, your contribution, and your resilience. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You just need to build. And when they think they've written you out, rewrite the ending. Applause broke out, soft at first. Then stronger. Then standing. But I didn't smile for the praise. I smiled because I knew I had done what few ever get to do. Not just rise, but return. Later that day, I walked past the old storage room that used to be labeled Flex Workspace. The one they had shoved me into when they thought I no longer mattered. It was now a creative lounge. Light-filled. Open. Shared by interns and veterans alike. On the wall hung a framed print of our original startup logo, hand-sketched by me 8 years ago on a coffee-stained napkin. Someone had added a small brass plaque beneath it. Started in silence. Built to last. That evening, I sat alone in my office, lights dimmed, sipping tea as the sun dipped below the skyline. I took out my laptop, not to respond to emails or draft strategies, but to open the encrypted folder labeled 17th, the one I'd created the day I discovered everything. The folder that held betrayal, fraud, and the raw proof of who Mason had become. I hovered over the delete button for a moment. And then I clicked. Delete. Not because I forgave him. Not because I forgot. But because I didn't need the evidence anymore. The world already knew who he was. And more importantly, it finally knew who I was. 3 months later, a young woman named Kiara joined our strategy team. Fresh out of college. Bright, sharp eyes full of ideas and uncertainty. One afternoon, I found her sitting alone in the cafeteria, looking at a pitch deck with red marks all over it. They said it was too ambitious, she murmured when I asked. Maybe I just don't get how this place works yet. I smiled and sat down. No, I said gently. You get it just fine. They just haven't caught up to you yet. Keep going. She did. And I knew, in that moment, everything had come full circle. Because the greatest revenge wasn't dismantling Mason. It wasn't watching Lana walk away with nothing. It wasn't the boardroom vote or the quiet stares of the people who once ignored me. It was this. A company that listened. A future that saw people. And a woman, once erased, who now signed every contract with the hand they tried to silence. I am Janet Blake. Co-founder. CEO. Strategist. Survivor. And I never needed to shout to be heard. Because in the end, silence spoke louder. Sometimes, power doesn't need a stage, it just needs a plan. Janet didn't fight back with fists or fury. She waited. She watched. And when the time came, she turned betrayal into a blueprint. What would you do if you were in Janet's place? Was her silence strength, or something more? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more powerful stories of comeback, courage, and quiet triumph.